In this lesson, we'll talk about a unit testing strategy called stubbing to write a unit test for our initWithCoder method. One of the goals we have when writing a unit test is to test that functionality in isolation from its collaborating objects. If we look at the implementation of initWithCoder, we can see that it is retrieving values from an NSCoder instance that gets passed to this method. Passing a real instance to our unit test would be problematic and would subject us to the behavior implemented by NSCoder, which we don't want. Instead, we can pass a stub. A stub is just a dummy object that stubs out the minimal behavior needed by our test. We could create an NSCoder stub by hand, but often a more convenient way of doing this is through the use of an open source framework called OCMock. OCMock is a widely used add-on to OCUnit that is used to provide stubbing and mocking behavior in a unit test. We'll look at the details in a minute, but first we need to get it set up within our project. You can find the project at OCMock.org. And from here you can download the distribution, read some documentation about the framework. There are directions specifically for iOS 5, getting that set up in your project. And you'll also find links to a number of tutorials on how to use this library. I already have a copy on my desktop, and you'll find a copy in your working files directory as well. OCMock is packaged as a static library, so this file with a .a extension. A static library is packaged as the library itself, and then a collection of headers. Now I'll drag this whole directory onto the root of my project. And we'll say copy items into destination groups folder, create groups for any added folders, and we want to make sure we uncheck iMusic and make sure just iMusic test is checked. And select finish. Now I'll drag this down a little bit to situate it next to our frameworks directory. So by doing that and adding it to the test target, it automatically linked against the libocmock.a file. But we do need to take one additional step to inform the compiler how to resolve the various header files that are included with this. So with our test bundle target selected, I'll select build settings, and we'll search for header search paths. So here's this entry right here. I'll just hit the return key and pass this the value of, actually I want to wrap this in quotes, but $ brace source root / libraries. And make sure the whole thing's quoted. So when I hit the enter key again, it then expands and we can see the full path that that's resolving to. Now let's switch over to our test, and I'll just import the OCMock headers to make sure this compiles correctly. Hit Command B, and that looks good. So our header search paths are set up correctly now. So let's create a test for our initWithCoder method. So let me switch to this tab for our test case, and I'll make sure I open up Artist again in this one. We can see that we're retrieving this data by calling these decode methods from our NSCoder instance. So let's go about implementing this using OCMock. I'll first create a stub coder. So this will be our stub that we're going to pass into this method using OCMock objects mock for class method, and we can tell it what class type to create a stub for. I'll create a local variable to store our artist ID, and I'm going to typecast it to an NS integer. You'll find that both OCMock and OCUnit are a little bit touchy about type coercion. So in this case, I want to explicitly cast that as an NS integer type. I'm then going to start defining the actual stubbing behavior. So I'm going to call stubcoder and call it stub method, and then call and return value this OCMock value, which is our local artist ID, and then call decode integer for key, passing in the string artist ID. Now, the syntax is a little weird to get used to at first, but the way you can read this is saying that when the decode integer for key method is invoked with the specific key, then return this local artist ID value. We'll do the same thing for our artist name. So stubcoder, stub, and return artist name whenever decode object for key with this artist name string is passed in. I'll then invoke my method under test, which is init with coder, passing in that stub coder. I'll then make the same kind of assertions as I made above, just to verify that the artist ID and artist name that I'm expecting did in fact get returned. I'll type Command U to test this out. And I can see that we've got one additional problem that we need to resolve. When we imported the project, I forgot to set one other flag in its configuration. So let me just stop that. I'll switch back. And under build settings, look for other linker flags. Oftentimes when we pull in a static library, that static library might define some categories. And in order for the categories to function properly, we need to make sure we set this other linker flag. So I'll just pass obj-c. And this just helps the linker resolve those categories that are being called. So I'll type Command U again. And we can see our test succeeded. Let's just do that one more time. Do a clean build. And type Command U, make sure everything looks good. And test succeeded. In this lesson, we pulled in the OCMock framework to provide our stubbing behavior. As part of getting this pulled into the project, we saw how to set up a static library, and you can use the same basic process to pull in any static library. And don't forget that obj-c flag. You should now have a basic understanding of stubbing using OCMock.